Welcome to Open Minds Radio with Alejandro Rojas. Open Minds Radio is your UFO news authority, presenting evidence and the latest news regarding the UFO phenomenon. Here's your host, Alejandro Rojas.
Some trippy music, man. Hello, it's Alejandro, and you're listening to Open Minds Radio, and I am once again honored to be in your presence and to share some wonderful UFO knowledge, debate, and talk with you. We have a perfect show for, although hopefully you're not just like politicked out and tired of all of this stuff, but we're talking politics tonight. We're talking most UFO and White House stuff and how politics is affected by UFOs and that sort of thing. So we're not going to be talking about Newt and Mitt and whoever slept with or any of that kind of stuff. We're not going to ask Jason if he's in an open relationship or anything like that. We're going to just talk UFOs. So we have Grant Cameron on, who runs the site presidentialufo.com. He's the best researcher when it comes to the White House and UFOs. He's one of the best UFO researchers out there, period. He's very meticulous and getting data, and of course we've talked about him lately because he did a Freedom of Information Act request regarding the recent White House response to Stephen Bassett's petition asking for the White House to fess up that they have knowledge of communicating with extraterrestrials. And of course lately we find out Obama was on Mars. So we didn't get into that, but we just stuck to kind of that White House petition response. And he got some details about, what the correspondence was behind the creation of that response. So we'll talk to him about how he got that information, what it was like, what he thinks of it, and then we'll talk about these petitions and everything overall and his perspective on, is this the right way to go to ask the White House to do anything? Or are there more effective ways we can approach this subject? And I know he's got a lot of great opinions on this. So this is going to be wonderful. It's all White House. It's all politics tonight. It's going to be a lot of fun. You're going to love it. Trust me. I do want to mention that, Grant Cameron's going to be at the International UFO Congress, actually, which is great. And if you want to meet Grant, he's not speaking, so he's going to have a lot of time to just hang out with people, and you can buy him some drinks or have some dinner with him or whatever. So come on down to the UFO Congress this February 22nd to the 26th at Fort McDowell Resort. And the deadline for the cheap seats, for the getting everything at a discount, ends January 27th. So if you have been procrastinating and you've wanted to come and you want to get in on the cheaper fee, registration fee, then you're going to want to register by January 27th. That is like 4 days away. So you better get on the ball just right now. Go to ufocongress.com and register. I think it was last week I gave you guys a little bit of time to register on air here. I'm not going to give you time. Just go ahead and do it while we're talking this time. So go ahead and go to ufocongress.com and register. It'll take you no time. You'll be set, and then you'll be listening to the show thinking, no way, I'm going to meet these dudes. Awesome. Because I know a good amount of you probably talk that way. Maybe one or two. That's how Jason talks when he's not on the radio. Speaking of Jason McClellan, he is a guy who follows UFO news on a regular basis. And I'm talking at least a few times a day. He'll check his emails and look on the internet. And he'll post several stories throughout the day, which is really cool. So he's following UFO news on a regular basis. He posts it at openminds.tv, and then he comes here weekly to tell us about the UFO news. Let's go over to Jason McClellan, and let's talk some UFO news. Hello, Jason.
Let me make sure I have my radio voice on, Alejandro.
Yeah, don't do your regular yo.
No, I've got my radio voice ready.
Crazy, man.
That's right. Well, greetings, everyone. This is your Open Minds news brief for Monday, January 23rd, 2012. We'll start off with a UFO sighting. 6 UFOs were recently photographed in neighboring counties in England. The first of the 2 sightings occurred on the afternoon of January 7th in Kent. The witness, Ernestus Grixas, snapped a photo of 2 UFOs. He didn't notice the mysterious objects at the time, as he was simply taking photos on his iPhone of a cherry picker outside his home. Grixas only noticed the UFOs later when he was reviewing the photos. He described the UFOs in his photo to the Sun as the following. There are 2 white discs. I can't explain. I'm nowhere near a flight path. One is slightly fainter, as if it is further away or going at a different speed. The second sighting occurred on the morning of January 13th in Essex, as witness Josh Cummings was driving to work. He explained to the Sun, quote, I nearly crashed. I stopped to take this picture with my mobile. It was like the UFOs were surfing the clouds. They were there for 15 seconds, then vanished. As the Daily Mail reports, the sightings were made just 30 miles apart, in an area now dubbed the country's UFO hotspot. All 6 of these UFOs look strikingly similar, at least to me they do. Could the close proximity of the sightings, the, quote, remarkably similar UFOs, as the Sun describes them, and the matching ages of the 2 witnesses all be a coincidence? Both the witnesses happen to be 21 years old. Of course they could be a coincidence. It's possible that the same UFOs were seen by the 2 witnesses in different locations, and this happens frequently, but unfortunately few sightings are photographed by multiple witnesses. We wish we had more of that. The nearly identical UFOs bear a striking resemblance, in my opinion, to reflections of light bulbs hanging in light fixtures. Both photos were reportedly shot through windows, which increases the probability that the strange objects were simply light reflections. And some suggest the possibility that the 2 witnesses may know each other, hinting at a possible hoax. And I was speculating at this myself, Alejandro, and I came across the website of one of the witnesses. So one witness was identified by the Sun as a car salesman, and I noticed the other witness on his website listed that he owned a car sales business. So that paired with the matching ages, matching with the close proximity to the 2, I thought there might be something fishy going on. However, I must state that the witness, Grixas, contacted me and wanted to share his side of the story. So he wanted me to know that absolutely he did not hoax the photo. And he said, quote, I personally can't say whether it was a UFO or not because I was too busy focusing on my camera. I am a UFO fanatic, and I wish I did see it with my own eyes. But at this point, it remains a mystery.
Mm-hmm. Now, if I read correctly, this was, they were both shooting through glass.
Correct.
Yeah, see, because this really looks like, to me, the reflection of a lamp
right
on the window, and which happens quite a bit. And people typically say they didn't notice the UFO when they took the picture. And the reason is, we ignore reflections when we're looking through windows. It's something that's every day, and our brains just kind of don't register it. And so we see it afterwards. That happens a lot when people are taking pictures. You ignore things that are mundane and everyday, and then sometimes those things look weird in your pictures. And
right.
That's why people say that. So that's what it looks like to me.
Yeah, and one of the witnesses, he shot through glass, but he said it was in his car, so it wouldn't necessarily fit with like a lamp in a house.
Yeah.
But when you look at it, it could also be a street lamp, a couple of street lamps. And sometimes glass distorts an image or a reflection and makes it look like there are multiple objects when there could have just been 2 rather than 4 in that particular picture. But we don't know, but it does look like the reflection of a light or a lamp in the window.
Yeah, that's the hard part.
But they were interesting pictures.
Yeah, they are interesting. And I think, not to speak for you, the reason you want to look for that sort of thing is because what I am striving to find is photos that are incontrovertible evidence, because you want to take this to scientists and to people who are skeptical or mainstream people and say, look, you can't deny this is something weird. And so, unfortunately, because these look kind of similar to lights, these wouldn't be those kind of pictures. And I just want to explain that because some people get mad. Why are you talking down these pictures? And it's not that we're doing that. It's just we're looking for really good stuff so we can blow this baby wide open.
Yeah, that's true. I agree with you. And, I think it's valuable for everybody, when we can identify what a particular photo is, if it's not something that's unidentifiable. If we can point out what things are in photos that we routinely see in a lot of photos that are submitted to us.
Yeah.
We can help people understand what they're looking at in particular photos. We can make people aware so they know that when they have a photo of that, that's not something that's mysterious. It's not what we're looking for.
Yeah. We saw weird lights in the sky recently.
We did.
They turned out to be mundane things, and we had special mystery guests with us, who our audience will find about sometime in the future.
Yeah, that's right.
They had really crazy lights, and then they turned out to be nothing special.
We had a life-changing experience, my friend.
Change your life?
It did change my life.
Kind of like,
it was life-changing for me. Yeah,
good. It
hopefully
was fun.
We'll talk about that in the future, but that's a nice teaser for everybody.
Yeah, a little teaser.
All right. In other news, it was just a couple weeks ago that our guest from last week, Lee Spiegel of the Huffington Post, reported that the Mutual UFO Network, also known as MUFON, had already noticed an increase in UFO sightings reported in the first week of January compared to last year. And there was more activity reported by MUFON last week, but not related to UFO sightings. On Tuesday, January 17th, the Greeley Tribune reported that MUFON's international director, Clifford Clift, will be stepping down from his post. Cliff, who has occupied the position since March 2010, is resigning because he wants to spend more time with his family and because he wants to, spend more time being retired. And good for you, Cliff. That's what I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't be acceptable for me to do it, but he's of the comfortable age where I think it's acceptable. Society will allow him to enjoy retirement.
He's getting tired.
Yeah.
He wants to chill out. And, I don't think people understand these MUFON board members put in a lot of hours. Cliff is one of those guys. And people think, MUFON has all these resources. They don't. People are working and everything. People are busy. You only have a few people out there who are really giving it their all. And Cliff has been one of those people for many, many years.
Right. Yep. And David McDonald, a MUFON board member who has served the organization as Assistant Director of Investigations, Star Team Administrator, and State Director of Kentucky, will be replacing Clift as International Director on February 1st. Clift will reportedly remain active with the organization as he oversees the archives. But the organization's structure change isn't the only major activity recently reported by MUFON. MUFON headquarters, currently based in Greeley, Colorado, will be relocating to Ohio. Roger Marsh of Examiner.com explains, quote, McDonald will move MUFON International Headquarters to Cincinnati, Ohio, where he operates Global Airline Education Center and campus. Being centrally located, the international headquarters will be easily accessible to many more members. Cincinnati is within a 6-hour drive for 60% of the population of the United States, end quote. Clift is asking everyone to have patience during this transition period. He recently stated, quote, keep your eyes on the sky, and let's all welcome Mr. David McDonald as MUFON's new international director, end quote. And I know we've mentioned repeatedly that Clifford Clift will be speaking at the International UFO Congress, and just so you all know, nothing has changed with that. His stepping down has not affected that, and we are excited that Clifford Clift will still be speaking at the International UFO Congress. And I believe he speaks on Wednesday, the 22nd of February. Cool. So come on out and see Cliff.
Yeah, come meet Cliff. He's a really, really, if you haven't seen him talk or you haven't met him, he's a really nice guy. And he doesn't shy away from any questions. He's just and he's so funny. He's a lot of fun to watch talk. He's really funny.
It's an odd description, but, Cliff is one of the few people that I would describe as real. He's a real person. He's very down to earth. He's very accessible, and you're right. He is so funny. I don't think I've ever had a moment with Cliff where he doesn't make me laugh.
Yep.
He's a joker. I like him.
Yep, he's a good dude.
All right. Here's something kind of interesting. Well, it might sound like the plot of an awesome Hollywood movie. Russia wants to put a base on the moon.
Bum, bum, bum.
In real life. According to Russian Space Agency Chief Vladimir Popovkin, A growing body of research supports the idea that humans can live for extended periods of time on or around the moon. And as Space.com reports, Popovkin claims Russia is currently in talks with NASA and the European Space Agency about constructing manned research colonies in orbit around the moon and even on the moon. But here's where it's weird. Apparently NASA denies these claims. So NASA spokesman J.D. Harrington told Space.com, quote, "We believe Popovkin may be referring to the work of the International Space Exploration Coordination Group, the ISECG, and its Global Exploration Roadmap." Now, we talked probably months ago about this Global Exploration Roadmap of theirs, and what it is they developed a long-range roadmap for space exploration that included a possible manned mission to an asteroid or even the moon, but apparently no mention of a moon base. So we have this Russian scientist making these claims, and it certainly grabbed a lot of headlines. But NASA's saying, nah, I think he misinterpreted.
What do they know? I mean, just because, and these days, some of the news that's come out is Russia is, I don't know if they're kind of throwing their weight around a little more because they have some weight to throw around since they're shuttling us around, but how they're thinking of separating their programs from NASA and doing their own stuff. So if that's the case, we don't know if they're planning that or not. I think a Russian
Well, we don't,
scientist
but their response is to his claim saying that Russia is working with NASA and the European Space Agency
gotcha.
at building these bases.
Maybe it was supposed to be a secret.
I think it was.
Uh-oh.
I know. It seems kind of fishy that, they'd come out and say this, and then NASA goes, that's not true.
They're like, dude, that was a secret.
Yep.
Oh.
But,
Sorry.
it's been a weird couple of months with Russia in their space news. They've had some trouble with their rockets and satellites crashing to Earth,
Blaming
and then
the United
blaming the United
States.
States for causing the satellite to crash to Earth, and now saying that they're working with NASA to put a base on the moon. So
yeah, it is weird.
Kind of interesting. Well, let's talk about another sighting here. A glowing UFO in Devon, England was photographed by witness Gary McDermott on the night of Sunday, January 22nd. McDermott reportedly stopped his car to take a picture of a low-flying helicopter, and that's when he noticed the UFO. According to the Telegraph, the UFO was a red disc-shaped object with bright flashing lights. McDermott explained, quote, "It must have been a UFO, and I can't believe I'm saying that because I don't believe in them usually, and I'm always skeptical. But it was definitely not a normal aircraft. It was red, the shape they say UFO aircraft is, and has two bright lights coming out of it," end quote. The unknown object disappeared almost immediately after McDermott saw it, and the object in McDermott's photo, to me, at least, it appears more cigar or blimp-shaped than disc-shaped, but it's hard to tell from the photograph. And while the object looks very much like a dirigible to me, the witness's description of how the UFO vanished before his eyes is certainly not consistent with the behavior of a dirigible. According to the Telegraph, Devon police said they did not receive any UFO sighting reports in the area that night. So the object remains unidentified.
This is a weird picture. I mean, and, if since the lights on this thing are on one side, if it was a disc, maybe that's why that's only one side of it turned out in the picture, and that's why it looks more cigar-shaped.
Right.
So
yeah, that's certainly possible. It's difficult to make out the shape from that photo.
And a big deal is that he saw this thing,
Yeah, by the time he saw
before
it,
he took the picture.
Yeah, he saw it, took the picture, and then before he could tell his buddy, hey, look, it was gone.
Yeah, so it's probably not a flare off of his camera.
Right.
So, yeah, kind of weird.
I guess it could be a super fast blimp.
Super fast extraterrestrial blimp.
That's awesome.
Could be.
Yeah.
Maybe from the future.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Well, that one's pretty exciting.
Yeah, cool pick.
Yeah, I like it. Like I said, when I initially saw it, I thought, that's possibly a blimp. But yeah, the description again completely changes that. So
yeah,
and we
really
talked
weird.
about this before. I mean, with sightings, witness testimony is a large part of what we have to go on. You know, and you can either believe them or not, but it's there. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the puzzle pieces we have to work with.
Yep.
So, well, Alejandro, that is all the news I have for today. have many more stories on openminds.tv, and you can always go there to check out the many stories we have there. And I am Jason McClellan, your Open Minds news correspondent, and you've just been briefed. Back to you, Alejandro.
Thank you, Jason. So some great news items there. Go check out McDermott's picture. And also some other news that Open Minds has been making this week is around a Chilean general who is going to speak at the UFO Congress that we were just talking about. This is exciting because this is a guy who is in charge of an official government UFO investigative organization. They essentially say their mission is to pursue solid UFO cases with adequate scientific data, but only if there's an indication that the safety of the aircraft might have been at risk. They call themselves CEFAA, C-E-F-A-A, which stands for the Committee for the Study of Aerial Anomalous Phenomena. And they don't fit the acronym because, of course, it's Spanish. That's the English version of it. So CEFAA, and if you go to their website, then you can see the cases that they have investigated, and they have investigated quite a few that they think are really interesting. So this is really cool. He's a retired general. He did a lot of cool stuff. He was the Chilean air attaché in London and the commander of the Chilean Air Force's southern region for a period of time. And then he founded this UFO group in 1998, which is an official branch of their version of the FAA. So this is a real organization interviewing UFOs. He wrote, General Bermudez is his name, he wrote part of the UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record book by Leslie Kean. Excuse me. So this is really cool. A general coming to talk about UFOs and an official UFO investigative project. So this is like, a big deal. So that's why it is getting some press out there, which is really great. And again, if you want to catch this and catch the UFO Congress, be sure to register in the next couple of days so you can catch the discounted early bird prices. Speaking of governments, what about the United States government? Those bunch of jokers, they're dropping the ball, and we have the guy who is an expert on the details of how the U.S. government is dropping the ball on the UFO matter, and that is Grant Cameron of PresidentialUFO.com. Let's get him on the line. I am very happy to speak once again to my good buddy Grant Cameron, who runs PresidentialUFO.com, the authority on presidents and UFOs, the perfect person to talk to about the recent White House UFO petitions. Welcome.
Well, Alejandro, thanks for having me on. It's good to talk to you again.
Yep, it's always fun. So, yeah, I know we'll get into it, and we always have a lot to talk about. And really, these petitions. So it started off with Stephen Bassett's petition, more around the extraterrestrial aspect, asking for proof of extraterrestrials. Now, my first question for you, a lot of people criticized Bassett for centering it around asking for evidence of communication with extraterrestrials, and that's more of a long shot. However, in his defense, do you really think that the White House would have taken any UFO-centric petition seriously, no matter what the verbiage?
Yeah, I agree. In defense of Steve Bassett, I've been friends with Steve Bassett for a number of years, and when I first began the president's site, he had given me some advice and was one of probably my biggest supporter in the UFO community, pushing, and he's got quite a group of people that he pushed in and moved my site up the chain. In his defense, I think Steve there's a thing in the UFO community now, this ABA, anything but alien. We're changing the verbiage, and sort of like we're embarrassed. We're the Rodney Dangerfield of the scientific world, and we don't want to really say ET. I'll give Steve credit. Steve, there's no playing around. Steve just says what he thinks is true. He doesn't play any games. And basically, he believes the Roswell story. He believes basically they've got the evidence, they got the bodies, they've been in communication, they know, and let's just get it out there. Let's quit playing around. And he's a lobbyist. He's going to push. So his effort using the ET thing was just what he basically thought. He believes the government knows what's going on, that the White House can change it. And that's why how his petition was filed, and he did get a lot of flack from people who, really are sensitive about their reputations and really don't want to sort of offend anybody. So I think that's where the backlash came in terms of the verbiage. I don't really think it's really going to make any difference, and I filed my FOIAs and expecting exactly what I got. I was not surprised of any of the replies that I got. I've been through this a lot of times in articles I've written, where I basically say that if you understand how government works, they're never going to deal with this issue.
Right.
Whether it's Congress or whether it's the White House. And there's even a question as to whether the White House is really in the loop, because as you know, President Clinton on a number of occasions seemed to indicate that he tried to get to the answer and was unable to get the answer. So whether the White House would even know is not going anywhere. So when I filed my FOIAs, I sort of assumed that the office that was handed it was the Office of Science and Technology Policy, which is the Office of the Science Director to the President. And they've been involved a number of times, right back to the Jimmy Carter days, the Office of Science and Technology Policy.
And I just want to clarify real quick. I mean, we did talk about this in previous shows, but you filed a Freedom of Information Act request to the White House Scientific Policy Department. You can clarify the department name, I forget. But you were asking for the drafts of the response to Bassett's extraterrestrial petition, and you got something, and we'll talk more details about that, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, let's just take that for an example. My assumption was that the Office of the Science Advisor, from my experience, and I know back when I filed in 2000, I filed with the Clinton White House, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and I got this sort of a gold mine. I got this 1,000 pages of material dealing with the Rockefeller Initiative, where Lawrence Rockefeller, this billionaire philanthropist, decides he's going to President Clinton, and he's going to get President Clinton to disclose UFOs. So he makes his approach to the White House, gets caught off by this same office that's now dealing with this petition, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and they basically deal with Rockefeller, and this for 3 years. This is correspondence and a bunch of people interacting in briefings and stuff like this, and they're dealing with the UFO subject to try to keep Lawrence Rockefeller from going to the president. So they're dealing with that level. So I knew then that, because at that point, Gibbons, who was running the office for Clinton, his science advisor, really didn't know anything about UFOs, really didn't want anything to do with it, and I assumed that this is going to be the same thing that happened here. So I actually filed 7 Freedom of Information Act requests once Bassett filed a petition. Now, when Stephen first filed a petition, I thought, well, this is kind of a goofy idea. They're not going to do anything. And actually, since the petition's come out, I've sort of actually started to believe that disclosure will come when it's time for disclosure to come, that you have to build it like a cake. You have to put the layers, and this is one of the layers that Steve put in there that at first I really didn't sort of agree, but now I say that this is one of the key things that has been done in ufology is this petition. And what it has done is, when Steve filed the petition, he got the appropriate number of signatures, which was 5,000, and he got the White House to respond. And some people have come out and said it wasn't an official response. It was just this Phil Larson guy giving his opinion on UFOs, or ETs, which is absolutely not true. If it's on the White House website, it is the president. And people have to see how the president works. There's nothing that happens around the president that isn't completely planned down to the last moment. So anything that's on the White House website has got approval. It is not. Nobody gets to have their own little personal opinion on there. The president speaks for everybody. The buck stops at the president's office, and he's responsible for everything. So this actually, when Steve filed the petition, I say this is an official response on behalf of the U.S. government on the subject of ETs.
Right. Well, from the White House, right? This is an official response, and the emails that you received through your FOIA prove that. I mean, he wrote it, sure, but he passed it on to the rest of the group and got approval from his supervisors. I mean, he had to get the stamp of approval before this went out because, as it says, it is an official response.
Yes, and that's what I haven't really firmly established yet. You can tell there's these two other people. The guy that wrote it was Phil Larson, and Phil Larson is nothing but a PR guy.
Yeah.
He really doesn't know anything about anything. I mean, if you go to the White House website, with the Office of Science and Technology Policy, you'll see that every day he writes a story about something else, and he's just putting the best spin on what the Office of the Science Advisor is doing in terms of new technology and green energy and Mars, and he just writes the articles. He really didn't have anything, and that's why I went after the drafts. I wanted to find out who gave approval, which I still don't know what the approval was. It was we know that there was this the website that was there was We the People, and there was a girl that ran the website, and we know that Larson went to these meetings, and that they were given petitions, and the Office of Science Technology Policy was given 3 petitions, not just the ET petition. They were given 3 petitions to answer, and we know it came at that level. Now, as to who decided what was going to happen and what was going to be put down, that I wasn't able to establish. And I talked about this before. There's this B5 exemption, which is sort of a situation where if you're giving advice to another department or to the president or to somebody, that is now exempt under the Freedom of Information Act for 12 years. So when I asked for the drafts, basically all the drafts were withheld. And what I was trying to do, because I got lucky once before, I filed, when I was in Los Angeles, I had filed with the Reagan Library for the speech that Ronald Reagan had given at the 1987 United Nations, where he talked about the alien invasion. And I had asked for all the speech drafts, and at that time they weren't using this B5 exemption of pulling all this stuff out. And what I found there was I was trying to find out, how did the alien invasion thing get into the speech, who put it in, what did people respond, and you could see all the interactions as all these drafts of the speech would go to the CIA and the military and all sorts of stuff, and you could see what people were reacting to it. And you could also see that at one point they had pulled the alien invasion remark out of the speech, and Ronald Reagan in his own handwriting had asked to have it put back in. He wrote this memo. So that's what I was doing here, is I was trying to get the speech drafts to see whether it had gone to the CIA, had it gone to NASA, did someone in CIA make a comment, did the president make a comment, did the president see it, and all the speech drafts were withheld. Because
although this was a short process. I mean, they only had a couple days to come up with something and submit it and get it out, it looks like, from the drafts that you had. Yeah. So it appears that he probably, and because of the verbiage, which is not very deep, it's very, it's like someone could Google and find the information that he found. It seems like he probably wrote it himself. But like you said, you don't know what other agencies might have had to put their stamp on it before it got approved. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, we do know it went to NASA. It went to these 2 guys in NASA, public relations, head of public relations for NASA, and this other guy, and they basically, by the looks of it, didn't make any comments. Now, I'm filing a Free Information Act request with NASA, hopefully on their end to get their documentation that maybe they'll release something that the Science Advisor's Office didn't release. But we know it went there. We know it didn't go to the CIA, which was the key thing. I had filed one Freedom of Information Act request asking for Ronald Pandolfi, because if you follow the Ronald Pandolfi story, and he's supposedly the guy that runs the Weird Desk, or he did run the Weird Desk with the UFO and the paranormal and the phenomenology files, as they call them, that he was sort of the guy that during the Clinton administration, when the office the science advisor knew that Rockefeller was coming to the White House, the first thing he did, because Gibbons didn't know what was going on with UFOs, is he asked for a UFO briefing. And he went to the CIA for the UFO briefing, and the job was given to Ronald Pandolfi. And Ronald Pandolfi sloughed the job off on because he couldn't give an official briefing for the CIA because the CIA isn't involved with UFOs. So what he did was he gave it to Bruce Maccabee to write a briefing for the science advisor, and then it becomes just some civilian off the street, which really doesn't mean anything. It's nothing official, to provide this information for Gibbons. So what I done in this one is I asked for an FOIA about all the contacts between Larson, who had written the draft, and Ronald Pandolfi. And what I was trying to find out, was Ronald Pandolfi involved in this thing? Because he was involved in 93. He went in, talked to Gibbons, and told Gibbons, don't deal with UFOs, stay away from it. And I wanted to see, and this came back and said, no, there was no contact. So it appears that the Larson drafted it. It went to NASA. They just said, yeah, okay, looks good to us. It went back, and they threw this thing out, and it was the end of the story. The other thing I established, and I tried to, because the petition was signed by 12,000 plus people, it was addressed to President Obama. So, of course, one of the FOIAs I had was I want all the correspondence inside the office of the science advisor, which would indicate or show that President Obama or anybody inside the executive office acting on his behalf actually saw the petition. And they came back, no documentation, which, as far as I can tell right now, indicates that the president nor anybody in his office ever saw the petition, which is pretty damaging for their side. And but that's what I expected that would come back. It was just something that you have all these issues, and you throw them down to different departments, and if it really gets serious and something happens, well, then they'll bring it to the president and say, well, we have to deal with this issue. But there's so many things going on, and I think people sort of forget that all the time, that the president has got 50 officials that report to him daily or every second day. Every one of those officials has got 100 plates up in the air, and they're only going to bring to him only what's extremely important or what he has to. That a lot of this stuff is dealt with, even though it's got the president's name on it, that other people are dealing on his behalf.
Right.
And that's what I think happened here. And I was able to sort of prove it in an indirect method that the president never saw the petition, even though 12,000 people signed. And one of the things that I requested, one of the petitions or the FOIAs that I filed, I missed it.
It looks like they gave up.
Why did they change it from 5,000 to 25,000? What I was hoping was that there was going to be some correspondence that would say, these UFO petitions and these marijuana and all these crazy people, we got to get rid of this. We've got to put the numbers up to 25,000 to stop people from filing these stupid petitions. And unfortunately, it's at a higher level than the Office of Science Advisor. So basically, they didn't have any documentation because they didn't make that decision to change it from 5,000 to 25,000, which now means it used to be in democracy, you could go to your representative, you go to the president and ask a question and get an answer, and now you need 25,000 people just to get the president or the president's office to answer a complaint from the constituents. And that's why I wrote the article when I went through trying to see. Like Steve does his thing, Leslie Kane does her thing, I do my thing. Everybody's doing what they think is going to move the football down the field and get it to the goal line. And so what I had done was filed my FOIAs, and then I'd looked at what has happened in ufology. What are the things that have really worked for us? And that's when I came across the idea that the president is probably not the office we should be dealing with, that we should be actually be dealing at a congressional or a senatorial level, because all the major developments, the major things that have happened where we've almost gotten some disclosure on UFOs have always been promoted by a senator or a congressman, and that's because they got political cover, which the president doesn't have. So
well, and that goes back to my original question, which was, one of the second petitions that came out, because I'm sure there's more and there'll continue to be more. It's a Dolan and Zabel one, and it's very well written. I mean, it talks more about the credible witnesses and so forth. Let's say this one had been part of the first, or let's say it would have gotten the number of signatures it needed. Do you think the White House even would have had much more to say than what they said to the first one?
No, I think it's the old thing is it's a political game. This is an issue that, especially in a year where you're campaigning for a re-election,
right,
this is something you do not want to touch.
Right,
and that's what it comes down to is you can see even in the article I wrote about the congressman, you'll get congressmen who will say, "Why doesn't the president do this? I'm just a congressman." I mean, they're just like, keep it away from me. Like, I mean, this is,
right.
I'd like to help you. Or, when Fox or when Stephen Greer went up onto the Hill and petitioned and went from office to office, they were both told the same thing, that we'd like to help you, but before we can help you or get the White House motivated to do something, you have to get a huge number of people to give us political backing. And once you do that, then we'll jump in there and we'll do something. And it's just an issue that it doesn't matter how – I don't think it matters how you word it. This is something the White House is not going to touch. And they're doing the same with all the petitions. If you take a look at all the petitions,
right,
it's very bland and they're just sort of
these fluffy answers that don't really have any meat to them.
Yeah, it's just sort of like everybody thinks that they're part of democracy and you're participating in what's going on and you get to put your name on things, then everybody feels involved and stuff like that. And people don't realize it's a political game. It's a game where in this upcoming election, it's $6 to $7 billion to get everybody elected, and you have people who are paying $35,800 for a seat to go to a fundraiser, and basically the UFO community has no money. It has no political clout. It has nobody, and basically what it comes down to is that people who are elected, whether it's at the senatorial level or the president level, you need huge amounts of money to get in, and the money it's basically like bribes. It's companies that are giving you money and they expect something in return, and the UFO community has no money, absolutely no money whatsoever, and no political influence, and we're just a sort of an annoyance. If we were able to generate a pile of money or show that we could cause some voting problems with them, then they would deal with it. But as it is right now, it's just not an issue they really have to deal with. Plus, it's an issue that has this secrecy aspect to it, that if the president does know, it's just something that's classified, and it's just something you don't want to go there, you don't want to open it because it's a classified issue.
Well, and it honestly, too, this field has a credibility issue. I mean, it's a grassroots type of thing. It's not, we don't have marketing or PR reps to help out in this situation. And I don't think the UFO community hasn't really established that this is a credible, I think we're getting better and better every day, but that this is a credible issue. There still isn't credibility. I think we're creeping up on it, but not quite there.
Yeah, and I think we need pressure, which we've never exerted. As I've always said, the most people, when they had this movement, and the name escapes me, back in the 1990s when they were protesting outside the White House, the most they ever had was 19 people. So, I mean, we just can't generate any sort of pressure. And as I've said for years, I've said, if you take a look at all the political and social movements in the United States, every single one of them that are ugly issues like gay rights and AIDS and women's right to vote and all these kind of civil rights issues that the government really didn't want to issue, the same types of issues that UFOs, it's like, get out of here with that stupid issue, I don't want to deal with it. It was massive pressure being exerted on the government that moved them to the point where they said, like, there's votes involved here, and then suddenly, everybody's along with it. We just don't have that kind of that influence on the government, and it has so many different things. But as I said, at a senatorial level, a lot of times it only takes one person to motivate this thing. And it almost happened. It happened when I was in Kansas City. I was lecturing in Kansas City in August, and when I was there, all they were talking about is UFO sightings and these sightings and this and sightings that, and all the people could talk about was all these UFO sightings in Kansas City. And then about a month ago, they had this cattle mutilation in Kansas City right outside the airport, which is because of the 9/11 thing. There's a lot of security around that airport, and this happened under the eyes of this security. This mutilation took place, and they were going to, now I don't know if they were getting a petition at the meeting, the last meeting they had, and they were going to try to get a congressman or a senator. And that's what I say has to be done, is that if you get something that's happening in a city where like this kind of things happens, that you go to the congressman and you say, we want action. We want you to do it. And the congressman is able, with Stephen Schiff or any of these people, where they go and they say, I really don't believe this is all nonsense, but these people want an answer, and I want an answer to this thing. And you'll see if you go back through history that in a lot of cases, only one person, Laura Johnstone, was when Bush was elected. Before he was elected, he promised to disclose UFOs. She went to Stephen Greer lecture in San Francisco. She heard Stephen Greer talking about this, disclosure and the fact that Bush had made this promise and stuff. She was a political activist. She had been arrested outside the White House. She was just itching for trouble, and she thought this was great. So she went on a hunger strike. So what did she do? She went and had her hunger strike on the steps of Barbara Boxer's office. Barbara Boxer was writing her letters and was contacting the vice president's office, and that was one person's activity. And that's what I think we need, is to sort of use these type of things where we don't need 12,000 signatures. We don't need everybody online. We just have to be able to pressure a senator, and then once we've got him making an official request, because they can make an official request. They don't need 12,000 senators to get the president to answer something. They can get an official answer by writing a letter, and they've got a lot of power, and a lot of them will do it if you give them that political cover. And there's numerous examples back through history where we almost got the apple cart upset because one congressman, and Schiff is a prime example, because he was in New Mexico, he was under a lot of pressure for the Roswell crash, and he put the request in, and he was sent, like you and I and everybody else that's ever made a request to the Air Force or the military. He was sent to the National Archives. He went to the National Archives, and they sort of laughed at him, and he suddenly realized he was being had, and he got upset. And when he got upset, he said, "There's something going on here," and he started to push it, and he used his power to get this investigation done by the GOA. So that was one guy who had a couple of requests from constituents, went and got upset, and actually got the Air Force to go and spend millions of dollars to reinvestigate the Roswell thing. That happened very little, and you don't need these big things. So that's what I say to people now, is that if you've got something happening locally, go to the congressman, go to the senator, and demand action, and get them to write an official. And I've even done it in Canada. We have members of parliament, and I actually had a member of parliament here write an official letter to the government and get responses from the government on Wilbur Smith, who ran the Canadian government UFO program. And I was pushing him, and he was doing this kind of stuff for me, and it even worked in my case. The problem was that then this guy became member of the government. And if he's in the government, then it's his government, and he's not going to do anything. And it ended for me. But it did work for me, and I think it'll work for anybody who has a local sighting or something happens, especially like a mutilation where there's damage and you can get action, and then keep the pressure on the congressman, and you can work officially through there. And there's a number of examples that show that this is kind of an effective way of getting something done. Mm-hmm.
Now, to this point, especially with the Obama administration, this is someone, as far as presidents go, who, at least past presidents, Reagan, Clinton especially, George Bush, like you just mentioned, have at least been faced, even with you. You asked a great question of Dick Cheney. They've at least had to speak to the situation. Obama seems to have absolutely no interest in this field whatsoever. He showed no indication of having any interest. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, exactly. He even when he was campaigning, as you know, he was asked a question about the alien thing. If you become president, find out that we've been visited by aliens, would you tell the people? And he, of course, the way a lot of politicians will deal with it is the way Obama deal with it. He's a good politician. Is he made a joke out of it? He said, "Well, it depends whether they're Republicans or Democrats."
Mm-hmm.
And he was asked the question at the when he was campaigning, this question about life in outer space, and he actually truthfully stated his position that, there may be people coming from other planets here, but that's not my interest. My interest and his interest is, the social policy and education
Right.
and the poor people and all this sort of stuff. And that's his bottom line. And even during the campaign, if you remember back to the Texas caucus or whatever they had down there, that was when Bill Clinton made this big speech at NASA in Houston, and basically said this President Obama is not a friend of space. That Hillary is the person who's interested in space, and you should vote for Hillary. So Bill was saying directly at that point that he was not even interested in space, and you can see that right now. Basically, NASA has basically been shut down, and he wants it to go private. And it's not his interest, and it's so hard to get to the president, to get an issue to the president, that if a president really doesn't want to deal with it, there's not much you're going to deal with it, because the White House press corps is not going to ask the question unless something happens, because they're all afraid of their jobs. You don't want your White House press pass pulled because you asked some stupid UFO question. And you can see now, in terms of the Republicans, we have an issue where nobody's asked the Republicans about it. We haven't even requested. So why would the president deal with it if nobody's asking the question? And that's basically what it comes down to. If you go to my presidential UFO website, you'll see I got the big UFO request from the Clinton Library, and that was the big request on UFOs, flying saucers, the regular request, and it came back with 900 pages. And in there, if you take a look at those 900 pages, how many letters were written to Bill Clinton about UFOs, like, Mr. President, do something? There basically are none.
Right.
And that's over 8 years of a presidency, that we sort of think that we're doing big things and we're putting pressure. And basically, you go and look, and nobody's asking questions, nobody's putting pressure on them, nobody's asking the Republicans. We're just sort of sitting back, and it becomes. I think one of our big problems is it's to a lot of us, to you and I, or a couple of researchers, we're kind of fanatical, and we spend all our time doing it, and all our relatives and friends think we're a little bit weird, like, what's the big deal and stuff like that. But the vast majority of the UFO community, it's like an interest thing. It's like ghosts or life after death. It's like we like to read the books, and then you have a conference, and everybody like, oh, well, you can go down there for holiday. We'll go to the conference and listen to these interesting speakers. And at the end of this, you hear the speaker, and nobody goes on to the next one. Nobody goes and deals with that speaker or talks to the speaker. They just go on to the next one, and it's like an entertainment factor to a lot of people who are following the UFO community. We don't have that serious, hardcore thing, because I think a lot of it has got to do. It's not an issue of money. It's like if we're all losing our jobs because of it, well, then people would get upset, or if there was people getting killed or whatever. There's just nothing to really motivate us except sort of like a curiosity, an interest in this type of thing, and that's not something that's going to motivate somebody to go and stand outside the White House for 3 weeks or petition or do whatever.
Or it doesn't play for politics. Politics is about, and especially in the United States, it's about things that are related to money. We're the most capitalistic country, I think, probably in the world. It's got to relate to the economy, creating jobs, or hampering jobs, something like that around the economy. And this doesn't have anything to do with the economy.
They do polling. It's basically comes down to, and I've said this numerous times, it comes down to getting elected. It's got nothing to do with solving issues. It's got to do with how do you get elected. So you poll, and the 10 top issues, that's what you're going to deal with. That's what you're going to be. I'm going to be the Messiah. I'm going to save you from what you read those 10 top things. UFOs wouldn't be in the top 200.
Right.
If you polled, there would be nothing there. And so that's where you can't really blame them for not dealing with it, because why would you bring up an issue that really nobody really is questioning you about or concerned about. They basically are at things that get them elected, and a lot of the things, one has actually worked in our behalf, which sort of shows you how this game is played. Clinton was dealing with Rockefeller from 93 to 1996, and he actually met with Rockefeller in August of 1995 when they went to the Rockefeller Ranch. Now, a lot of people think, well, he went to the Rockefeller Ranch and there was this UFO thing. People don't, if you look exactly what happened behind the scenes, you'll see how this actually took place, and that was that Dick Morris, Clinton was in a lot of trouble in 95 for re-election, and it looked like he wasn't going to get re-elected, and he brought on Dick Morris as his advisor, and these are these campaign guys who are the guys who actually get them elected, and they read the polls, and they figure out how to do it. And what Dick Morris came up with is you've got to go and you've got to spend your holiday in the wilderness. Clinton used to spend his holiday at the Hamptons with all the rich guys, and they'd go golfing and they'd go to cocktail parties and have a good old time with all the rich people at the Hamptons. And he said, no, you've got to go to the wilderness, because Dick Morris had determined in the 1996 election, the swing voters, you're going to have your people who vote Republican all the time, people who vote Democrat all the time. Everybody wants the swing voters. So you poll the swing voters. What do the swing voters want? And in 1995, Dick Morris had determined the swing voters wanted somebody who was they were into technology, they were into the outdoors, they were into fishing and camping and skiing and all this kind of stuff. So Clinton went to the Rockefeller Ranch, not because he wanted to go to the Rockefeller Ranch, because in the 1996 election, he was trying to get the swing voters. So he had to go camping. He hated it. It's well known that he hated being at the Rockefeller Ranch. Because he had to go, and he made the joke about doing the whitewater rafting, and he wanted to be with the buddies in the Hamptons, but he had to go to the Rockefeller Ranch, and that was because Dick Morris had told him that you need the swing voters, and that's why he went there to the wilderness. He had no intention of going to Wyoming. That was the last place he wanted to go and spend his holidays. So this is what people have to realize. What's going on behind the scenes is the day that ufology can get them some votes or cause them some trouble, that's the day they're going to deal with it. But as long as it doesn't really matter, they've got so many things that they're going to get them votes that this is not something you're going to spend any time on whatsoever. Well, and in fact, and you know from Kucinich, who was a guy who had a major UFO sighting, not just a sighting. He had a close encounter. He was like 200 yards away from this thing, sitting right there. He and a couple of witnesses, and he gets cornered in the Democratic debate about this thing. And I followed the polls, or not the polls, but the newspaper articles after he admitted that he'd seen this UFO, and there was hundreds of articles written about him, trying to get Cheney impeached and all different issues, and every single one of them sort of referred to him as this crazy UFO guy. And so he backed away. And if Kucinich, who's a pretty hardcore guy, Danny Sheehan had run his policy on his one campaign. He was a pretty guy who's open and is not afraid to say things. If he backs off the UFO issue, then you can tell how toxic this thing is, and everybody can just take a look. If you're a politician, look at what happened to Kucinich and think, is this going to help me get reelected, or is it not? And people always think that it's a game of he wants to help us, he's the Messiah, he's going to come and solve all our problems. It's not. These guys have huge egos. They want to get elected, and they want to get reelected, and you need votes, and that's what it all comes down to, is getting reelected. And you can't solve anything unless you get reelected. And you can see all over the world these sort of crazy leaders who hang on to power. It's sort of toxic.
Right.
They've got to have the power, and it's all about votes. It's all about getting elected. And I say that
never ending.
If somebody gets off that, we're in trouble. If we start thinking there's something else going on in politics, we're off track as to what we have to do to actually get the UFO issue out there, front and center, or solved, or disclosure, or whatever you want to call it. Right now, we're doing some things that really don't mesh with what's actually going on behind the scenes.
Right. Got to be more savvy. And that's why I like what you do, and I like hitting on the history, because a lot of people forget about the history, because history can teach us a lot. And the history in this field has taught us, I think, over and over again, what you just said, because there have been these politicians, in some cases, who have been very serious. You mentioned earlier Congressman Schiff, but you also have Barry Goldwater. You have Gerald Ford. You have Clinton himself. You have the UN. These were big projects. These were big happenings where people were pushing hard. We want answers on UFOs. And it shows the political route, no matter what kind of strength or people you have behind it, has not been effective.
Yeah. The Ford is a prime example because Ford, people might not know that J. Allen Hynek was in his constituency. And he had this thing with the sightings in Michigan, which was his area. And he was getting questions from constituents and stuff like that. And then Hynek came out and made this stupid statement about the swamp gas, and then he was infuriated.
Yeah, that really pissed Ford off.
Two congressional, one sort of a hearing, and then the 68 one, when other congressmen realized were taking for a ride, and that went. But then you see what happens once he gets to the White House. He becomes the president. His political cover is gone. He's no longer just a congressman who's fighting for his constituents. Suddenly he's the president. It's his cover-up and his UFO thing, and suddenly he goes silent. He doesn't do anything. The same as Jimmy Carter. Right. Jimmy Carter was very vocal about UFOs before he got into the presidency. He was running, and he was, he's had short sleeves, didn't wear the tie. He was going to be, the outsider from outside of Washington and stuff like that. And it was an issue that he was with the people. We'd like some answer to this. I've seen something. I'd like some answers. As soon as he gets in, suddenly it's like dead silence because his political cover is gone. And at these local levels, there's a lot of examples. Even the bizarre Lazar thing, which I discovered when I wrote the Area 51 article, is that Bob Lazar had a congressman who was backing him, who
really
George Knapp was using because there was so much dispute about this,
tell us his story.
W-2 form and all this kind of stuff, and he was writing these official letters, getting official answers as to who this guy was, his tax records and all this sort of stuff. And even in these bizarre cases, people don't know that there was congressmen who were involved, and he wrote a letter on behalf of Lazar when he went to court in 1991 or whatever it was on this pandering charge. So you can get these people on your side, and they can do a lot of damage because they can write official letters, and you can't slough off a congressman or a senator. And a lot of them will do it because they actually are closer to the vote. They know that your vote counts and that you can cause some trouble, and they're trying to show that they're answering constituents' demands and stuff like that, writing letters on their behalf. They do this on all sorts of subjects, and we should.
So you're saying, but just to clarify there, that Bob Lazar had a congressman that was sympathetic to his cause, and the cause being that Bob Lazar said he worked at Area 51 and worked on back-engineered alien technology. This congressman believed that, and so this congressman, because of that, helped him when Lazar had some legal problems.
Okay, just a bit of clarification. I don't think it was that he believed it. It was that I think George Knapp hasn't really explained this whole thing, but it was James Bilbray who was the guy, and I think Knapp was using Bilbray to get answers. Like, we need some answers on this W-2 form. I know that was one of the things that we're looking at was trying to get this established. Was this an official document? Like, with this, was he getting
Bob
paid?
Lazar had a W-2 that said it was from the Navy, right? Department of the Navy, and he said this proves that I did work at Area 51. So
Knapp was using this kind of stuff. He was trying to track down all this official material, trying to get some official acknowledgement that he'd worked at Los Alamos or he'd worked at Area 51, that he was getting paid, this sort of stuff. And he was going through Bilbray, and Bilbray, as any congressman would have to do, was writing letters on his behalf, which are official letters. Whereas if Knapp were to write to the Defense Department, they would just sort of, like, who cares? I mean, some guy who has a letter. A congressman or a senator has a lot of clout in terms of they have to answer his letter. They can't just slough him off, and that's what happened with Stephen Schiff, is that they sloughed him off and if you read, and I've written an article, I've never published it yet, but I wrote an article that really details what happened with Schiff, and he was furious when they sent him to the National Archives, and he realized that they were just running him around, and then he went back to Clinton's Secretary of Defense, and then the Secretary of Defense wouldn't answer his letters. He got furious, and he had the power for whatever he had this power to authorize this investigation by the accounting office, and it was just his position. And he said, "Okay, you want to play that game?" That's when the accounting office came in and forced them to reinvestigate Roswell, and it was because Schiff got upset because he was being jerked around by the Department of Defense and sent to all sorts of places, and realized he was getting the runaround.
And of course, the Air Force, or the report that Schiff forced, said there was nothing to Roswell. Just
they
for
don't
listeners.
play that game, but you can get close. In fact, you got close twice in the Roswell thing. Some people don't realize there was two Roswell reports. There was the first one that came out, and that was forced by. There was actually a number of reports. There was the Schiff report, which was different than the Air Force report. The Air Force report was forced by Rockefeller, and Rockefeller had gone in and said they basically said, well, we really can't do anything and all sorts of stuff. And he said, I'm thinking of putting a major ad in all the major newspapers in the United States asking for disclosure. And they said, okay, hang on, we'll do. And it was, they requested, like the Rockefeller was asking for the amnesty, which was granted by the Secretary of the Air Force in '93. They gave amnesty to all the Roswell people. That was Rockefeller pushed that, and Rockefeller wanted the investigation. So there was the Air Force, and then there was the GOA report, which is two separate. But when the Air Force report came back that Rockefeller had forced through the science advisor, it went back and Clinton saw it, and then Clinton goes to Belfast, Northern Ireland to light the Christmas tree in November of 1995, and that's when he stands up and he challenges the report indirectly. He says, if there was no crash at Roswell, but if the Air Force did recover bodies, they didn't tell me about it, and I want to know. And I went up to the speeches, and that I want to know part wasn't in the original speech.
Wow.
And Clinton ad-libbed that. When he gave the speech, he said, I want to know. And so in 1997, the Air Force does a second Roswell report, and nobody's ever explained until you see this speech in 1995 that Clinton gave as to why did they do a second report. In the second report, they come out with the bodies, the stupid story about the 6-foot wooden dummies that were dropped in 1953 and the time shifting and all this nonsense. And that was the Air Force getting stuck by Clinton to say, I don't believe you. You didn't explain the bodies because there's no report of the bodies in the first Roswell report. They don't talk about the people seeing the little alien bodies. So the Air Force has to go back and explain the bodies. So they go back and do a second Roswell report, and they put it back on the president's desk and say, here's your answer to the bodies. And Clinton is now, it's his Air Force, so he's stuck. He can't do anything, and he just gives up. But there are actually two reports, and this is one is forced by Schiff, and the second one is forced by Clinton because Clinton got upset.
Right.
The first Roswell report. So this is the way it works, is that sometimes I think disclosure may come from somebody's just pushing a congressman, or something happens and some president or some congressman just gets upset and decides, I'm going to run with this thing.
Now, to clarify,
you've seen it a number of times in the past that this has happened. In fact, I say that if you take a look through UFO history and take a look at all the highlights of UFO history where things have happened, it's always happened that way. And that's a pattern that I think we should take a look at, we should follow, and we should try to put pressure. And the Kansas City thing was a prime thing, or the Phoenix Lights thing. If people in Phoenix had really gotten on top of that Phoenix Light thing and had gone to the congressman and put pressure on him, something would have happened. Now, the councilwoman had gone to McCain, and McCain had gone and asked questions about the Phoenix Light thing. So, but it just gave up. There wasn't enough pressure on John McCain to keep this thing going. But if the Phoenix people had gotten this thing and really put pressure on, it would have, a congressman would have had some footing to put some pressure on.
To put some pressure to get a response that just fluffs everybody off, like has been the result of all of these, though. I mean, even Schiff and all of these kind of, just like what Bassett received, are all of these kind of fluff answers that come back.
But the Schiff thing was an official thing. They spent millions of dollars on this study, and they had to scramble to walk their way out of this thing. I say when it comes to the Phil Larson response from the White House, this is the worst, absolute worst response we've ever gotten. This is pre-1947. If you take a look at the Blue Book report, they basically said, okay, there's, whatever percentage, 22% unknowns, but we don't believe it's national security, and we don't believe this. There was a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, that there was something to it. We just don't believe it's national security, and there's not enough evidence or whatever. This thing says there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing to this subject at all.
But in Larson's defense, though, he's addressing specifically extraterrestrial intelligence.
That's people's interpretation. Is I don't know if Larson would have read it that way, that we're going to play by the word and say, okay, this is ET. I think it was just like, in fact, he said, if you remember the FOIA, where he says, we got stuck, but I don't think he uses the word ET. We got stuck with the alien something.
Right.
I can't remember what the wording was. He's writing to somebody, and he said, we got tagged having to answer this, and he uses alien something, but he doesn't use the word ET. So I think that's an interpretation people have, that if we change the word ET, he might have answered it. There was no chance that they're going to touch it. They know it's UFOs. It's
well,
ET.
I think they would have fluffed it off, but they wouldn't have addressed ET. It would have been a different answer. I think it would have been really interesting to see what that answer would have been. But if it was worded properly, like, for instance, the Zabel Dolan one or whatever one, because Robert Solis had written one also, which was addressing the phenomena of the unknowns rather than the extraterrestrials. And so it might have been a different answer, because this is certainly extraterrestrial, and it gives him an easier answer because right now astrobiology is a big deal. I mean, the astrobiology is in the news every day about this possible planet having life, and Mars possibly having life, and the moon, and we're closer to this. So there's an official kind of stance or mainstream stance out there that is discussed on a regular basis.
Okay, but the difference between that is, and Larson was with Mars Project. He had a Mars background.
Mm-hmm.
And I bring this up is that if you're talking about, some planet out, wherever, it's no threat. Everybody can hypothesize that there's going to be some sort of ET life, as long as it doesn't look like ours, because evolution doesn't allow two exactly species to be the same. So you got planets out there, you got something going on Mars, whatever. That's not a threat. It's when it's here. And that's where I said that Larson, despite the fact that he had really no input in the whole thing, is not going to say, yes, even if it's UFOs, yes, I think we should take a look at UFOs and properly investigate incidents involving planes.
True.
Or however we want to word it.
I think what he would have said is probably something like, people misidentify things all the time, or something fluffy like that. Maybe even thrown in the goofy thing with the lady from SETI, I can't remember her name, who says, oh, I thought I saw a UFO and it turned out to be the moon.
Yeah.
I mean,
and see, but there's a threat there in terms of vested interest. People have to remember that the Office of the Science Advisor has got a bunch of vested interest. And one is, you just sent a probe to Mars, which cost $2.5 billion. It's $1 billion over budget, to drill a hole in a rock, looking for some sort of evidence that there's some sort of micro evidence of life. And so if you suddenly say they were to answer the Dolan petition and say, okay, yes, we should properly reinvestigate UFO sightings here on Earth and give it a proper scientific investigation. Who's going to spend $2.5 billion for another probe if you just suddenly admit that, yes, maybe there is some evidence that they're already here?
Well, but I don't think the two things are necessarily connected. Because, of course, a lot of people feel that not everybody's invested in the extraterrestrial hypotheses. Even people who are asking for people to look into the UFO phenomena. Nick Pope, for example. Or there's a lot of people, the UAP people, maybe you could call them, who believe there could be other answers. Jacques Vallée, even J. Allen Hynek himself, that there could be other answers other than extraterrestrial. So one doesn't necessarily mean the other.
Okay, but I still think there's that for Larson to be a Mars guy.
But I see your point. I mean, he
said that we should be looking here on Earth. it gets very hard for you if you go up in front of Congress and you want another $2.5 billion to send another probe to drill holes in Mars. They're going to say, well, you're looking here on Earth. I mean, why don't you just, it's a lot cheaper. Why don't we just spend this? Why should we give you $2.5 billion? There's a lot of vested interest, a lot of jobs at stake in keeping this thing suppressed. NASA, if it were actually admitted that you had disclosure and there was UFOs, what happens to NASA? Like, who's going to spend billions of dollars on NASA when suddenly it becomes apparent that they're already here? And like, what do we spend? This is like you get the John Lear argument that this is like some big, huge PR thing to scam people, and everybody's going to suddenly get that idea. Like, what, we've been taken for a ride here, that everybody's been lying to us, and the NASA thing just falls apart and it's in trouble already. And that's one of the reasons why in the Carter administration, and now again, NASA wouldn't touch this thing with a 10-foot pole, because their budget's been cut. This is not their thing to do. Their thing is to go and explore outer space, and it's nobody's real issue. And then you get to the issue with that John Alexander brings up, which I agree with, is people who are pushing for congressional studies and all this kind of stuff. He always says, be careful what you wish for. You may get it. Congress may take this issue, take a look at it, and there's so much power behind the scenes that they're going to come out with another blue book thing and say this is an absolute pile of nonsense. Then where do you go? Mm-hmm. That there's these forces behind that will, even if you can get it, and you need piles of congressmen and senators to sort of buy onto this thing, because you need both houses to get anything through. You're going to have a lot of people who are going to fight this, and they have a lot of power. And we in the UFO community, which I think is the bottom line, is we have no power, we have no money, and we have no influence. And we are just basically a couple of researchers, and everybody else it's a hobby.
Yeah.
And that's not something that the government, especially when they don't get a single request or a letter on it, that they should suddenly change gears and forget about the economy, forget about the situation in the Middle East or whatever, and suddenly go after this issue that nobody's ever written on. This is, I always say you have to take a look at how they think, and that's what I always do. Is I try to see, why are they covering this thing up? What if I was on the other side? And I've said numerous times that if I was on the other side and I had the issue, I'd probably do exactly the same thing they would do. I would be covering up.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I'm not on their side, so I'm playing the other game. But if I was on their side, I could see like, oh, man.
I always think of putting myself in their shoes, too, as far as if I was Obama's PR guy, even being someone who's sympathetic to the UFO phenomena, I would be like, you know what? This isn't the right time to touch this. If we even want to go there, this isn't the time to do it.
Yeah, which is a prime example, because I've written a number of articles which I haven't really published. I get interested in researching the articles and finding stuff. I was going to do an article on Podesta. Somebody asked me about what's the position with Podesta. And if you take a look at Podesta was known as the X-Files guy in the Clinton White House. He was extremely interested in the subject, and he actually phoned Area 51 to see if there was something going on at Area 51, and he was really interested. When he got out of power and Clinton got out and Bush came in, that's when he made this speech and said, I think we should get to the bottom of this thing. And everybody looked at it and said, well, this is the Messiah. Once Obama gets in, Podesta's going to go and talk to Obama. We're going to have disclosure, and it's all going to open up. And people have to realize how power politics works. Yeah. That now Podesta is on the other side. He's now back in power. And he is not the president, and he cannot come out and say, yes, I think we're getting messed around, UFOs are for real, and I think Obama should do something. He can't speak on behalf of the president. Once he's in power, this is what happened when I had my local representative write letters to the Canadian government on my behalf. Once he got into power, he wouldn't do anything for me, and that's the problem. Is the Podesta's in power now, and he can't speak on behalf of the president. He doesn't want to put the president in the position where the president has to answer the question, because it's going to make the president look bad, and he's going to get the blame for it. Plus, he's also working for Hillary. So you've got him working for the State Department one day a week, and Obama going out, but potential that Hillary's going to come back in and run and could win and end up in the presidency for 8 more years. This is a type of thing that if Hillary gets in, I would say my personal impression is Podesta will do nothing until there's a Republican back in again. because once you're in power, you can't speak on behalf of the president. You don't want to put the president in a bad light. Everybody's,
or your second term, because there's always the second term wildness. Second term president can, especially towards the end, do whatever the hell they want.
If
they don't mind about hurting their party, though, because of course they don't want to hurt their party.
Well, in Obama's case, I disagree. I actually think that too. In Obama's case, Obama is so determined to get reelected, he's running against his own party. He's going to run against the do-nothing Congress, and he's running against the Democrats. He's going to run against his own people.
Yeah.
And there was an example with this Keystone XL pipeline coming from Canada that Obama put it off. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He just said we're going to put it off because we haven't got the answers. We're going to put it off until after the election. And one of the people I was here, somebody said, this shows that Obama had a chance to create 10,000 jobs, and instead he chose to save one, his own. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He just put it off till after the election because he doesn't want to offend anybody before the election. If he says yes, he's going to offend the one group. If he says no for the pipeline, he's going to offend the other group. He's going to lose votes. This way, he just puts it off, and he can play Mr. Politician. He's a prime politician. He's everybody's.
Well, more than that too, because he's upset a lot of people about being weak, and at least this he can put his foot down and seem strong. And I agree. I was going to bring this up earlier. It's prime politics. It's a great example of a politically motivated move, and how everything's politically motivated, especially right now.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, people have to realize the amount of money that's in there, and if you put up $35,800 to go to a campaign dinner, get your picture taken with the president, you expect something in return. Nobody's going to convince me that those people are doing it for nothing. And there's so much money involved in the background, and anybody who's in ufology who's actually researched and tried to get research funds or run websites knows there is no money in ufology. There's nothing.
Yeah.
And
so I agree with you. I think it comes down to a lot of, in this field, putting the cart before the horse. I mean, going to the politicians and going to these places without having that energy or that strength or backing, and so just falling flat. It's like coming to the table with nothing, and that's the problem that keeps happening. And I think people get frustrated because it's been decades, and it's slow going. But kind of like what you've said here, it's harder for this particular issue than practically any other than many others, because there's no money behind it. There's no jobs or political, nothing like that going on. Plus, so there's no motivation on either side. And if there is this secrecy, you have a lot of people in power who benefit from nothing happening in this field. So I think what happens, what I have a hope, and I want to hear your opinion on this, is that of course there's a lot of polls that show a lot of people are interested. And even though UFO are mostly entertainment field like you're talking about, it's a very popular thing to the public. So entertainment can play to it. News, as you know, covers the subject a lot. TV shows are really popular right now on the subject. But I don't think that's a bad thing, because I think doing that, hitting the news, hitting the mainstream television, that at least starts to garner some sort of population that feel more and more comfortable to talk about it. And you have to grow and foster that huge population before you can do anything.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as I said, it's like building layers of a cake. Sometimes you look at something and you say, when I first saw the Bassett petition, I thought, wow, this is kind of goofy. I mean, knowing the White House, what was going to happen, I sort of thought, well, this is kind of crazy, or people were down on the Disclosure Project or exopolitics and stuff like this. I think these things are all things that we need. People are now, if you talk to even somebody on the street about disclosure, UFO disclosure, they sort of know what it is, or even exopolitics. These things are we're sort of educating the people where all the foundations are being laid, And there was a guy who wrote a book on invention that nothing really just gets invented. It's built one on top of another. Like, Facebook was built on the internet. The internet was built on ARPANET, and that was built on primitive computers that you get building and people build on it. And I think all these things have to come in place, and when the time is right, then it will happen. The thing that I think, as I said, we're missing the money, and the other thing we're missing is the real hard sort of the pressure politics, people who are ready to go out there and really put pressure on. And the prime example was in 2004 during the presidential campaign. General Wesley Clark is a 4-star general who had a unified command. Is in New Hampshire. He's campaigning in New Hampshire, and he's asked by Jay Buckley, the astronaut. He says, "What's your vision of space?" And he starts about this thing about, I believe we can go past the speed of light. I've argued with physicists and this sort of stuff. And I'm going, whoa! I mean, this guy's he was at the time he was leading the Democrats. And then I got an email that said he's been briefed on crash flying saucers. So I went to all the MUFON directors, state directors I could find, and we knew his campaign. We knew he was going. And I asked these MUFON state directors, he's there, he's having these townhouses and stuff. Somebody asked him the question I asked Cheney: have you ever been briefed on the subject of UFOs? And I got MUFON state directors coming back to me. 3 of them at least said, I don't want to do that. I don't want to embarrass him. And I said, you don't want to embarrass him? We don't want to embarrass him? If we don't want to ask the question, why would you expect the media or anybody else to go out and solve this for us? This is our problem to solve. This is our thing to do. And we just don't have the guts. When Laura Johnstone went on this 42-day hunger strike to get Bush to come and clean on UFOs, she was ridiculed. If you go back to UFO updates and you look at the postings, she was ridiculed. She's crazy. What is wrong with this woman? She's nuts. She's making us all look bad. She was a real radical who was ready to give her life. And I asked her when I went to California, when it ended, I said, Laura, why did you quit the UFO? Why did you quit your hunger strike after 42 days? She said, I just decided the UFO community didn't care, and if they don't give a damn, why should I die for them?
Yeah, people are so cynical in this field. I mean, even with these petitions, people unfortunately don't get out and do something. They don't even sign these petitions. How tough is it to click some links?
Exactly.
Even if the website's having problems, come back to the website daily if you have to, just to click a couple clicks. Big deal.
Sure.
But
there's a thing to protesting. If you take a look at the New York protests, or up here they call them change protests, these people didn't even know what they're protesting. They had but they knew what they were doing. They knew how to get this thing. They could get the 25,000 people to a protest, and they know what they're doing. And I think we have to learn from history, and we have to learn from protest movements what to do. There's a pattern. People follow a pattern, and if we want to do something, we've got to learn how to do it properly.
Right. Well, you know what? We're pretty much out of time. And I want to thank you again. This is extremely interesting. I think it's very insightful. Hopefully it inspires people to be a little more savvy about this and to think a little harder, because all of this is more complicated than it looks. And we have to look to, like you said, these successful programs to see how that works, and that we need to amass this credibility. We got to bring something to the table. You can't just be a mouse. You got to be an elephant, to come charging through the door. And we're just not there yet. You've done that with your
radio show. I mean, you've done as much as anybody.
And I think this kind of stuff is working. We're amassing an audience, and that's what I love about the Huffington Post having us, write, and luckily there are, like you said, a handful of great researchers such as yourself who give us a lot of fodder, give us a lot of credible information to get out there. So, yeah, you're, as I always say, you're one of my favorites, and your work is so important and great. Thank you so much for being on the show again. And
Thanks
I want to tell everybody, presidentialufo.com. And I guess I should ask you, is there something coming up? Is there something you want to plug?
No, I'll be in Phoenix. I'll come see you in Phoenix. That's my big thing. I'm coming to the conference.
Right.
I'm going to look at the Goldwater papers, which is something I don't know. I think your people, Open Minds, looked at.
Yeah.
When I went, I've got I haven't got the inventory, but there's over 300 pages.
Yeah.
UFO files in the Goldwater thing, and I'm spending a day 2 days to go up to Albuquerque, and I'm going to look at the shift papers. And there's quite a amount of material. And that's part of my thing is that I always believe that I'm not going to see disclosure. I've admitted that. I really don't care whether there's disclosure or not. My thing is I figure I was honored to have been involved in the UFO thing, to have a sighting, to have been involved in the UFO community, and my thing is to record as much of what has happened now for people 500 years from now, because 500 years they'll say, man, I wish I'd been when these guys were there. This was fantastic. We're here, and I'm honored to be here, to be a part of it, and I'm trying to document as many of these papers, and I put them up on my website. So I'm going to have the Goldwater papers up, and I'm going to have all the shift papers. I'm going to Albuquerque to photograph all the shift papers. So that's I guess, the only thing I've got, and I'll be at the UFO Congress, and we'll get together, and I appreciate all you've done for me. You've promoted my stuff, and you're one of the good guys. So
thanks. Ditto, buddy. All right. We'll see you in a few weeks.
You bet.
The great Grant Cameron. If you notice he said A lot, it's because he's out there in Canada, and that's why our connection wasn't 100%. He's up there in the cold Canadian tundra, and we're out here in the warm Arizona desert. But thank you guys so much for listening. Don't forget to join us next week, and also visit presidentialufo.com for more on Grant. Visit openminds.tv and ufodailynews.com for your latest and greatest UFO news. Talk to you next week, people.